This is the Everyday AI Show, the everyday podcast where we simplify AI and bring its power to your fingertips. Listen daily for practical advice to boost your career, business, and everyday life.
When ChatGPT first came out, no one was talking about compute, right? But over the last few years, as generative AI and large language models have become more prevalent, the concept of GPUs and compute has become almost like dinner time conversation. At least if you're crowding around the dinner table with a bunch of dorks like myself, right? But I think even more so the last few months. As we've seen as we've seen open source models really close the gap with proprietary and closed models, I think this concept of compute is even more important because now all of a sudden you have a lot of, probably millions of companies throughout the world, medium-sized companies that maybe weren't concerned or, weren't really paying attention to having their own compute maybe 2 years ago. Now, all of a sudden, it might be a big priority because of the new possibilities that very capable large language models and even smaller and open source models, all these capabilities they're giving to so many people. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about today, and also how distributed computing is unlocking affordable AI at scale. All right, I'm excited for this conversation. Hope you are too. What's going on, y'all? My name is Jordan Wilson, and this is Everyday AI. So this is your daily live stream podcast and free daily newsletter, helping us all not just keep up with what's happening in the world of AI, but how we can use it to get ahead to grow our companies and our careers. If that's exactly what you're doing, you're exactly in the right place. It starts here. This is where we learn from industry experts. We catch up with trends, but then the way you leverage this all is by going on our website. So go to youreverydayai.com. So there you'll sign up for our free daily newsletter. We will be recapping the main points of today's conversation, as well as keeping you up to date with all of the other important AI news that matters for you to be the smartest person in AI at your company. All right. So enough chit chat, y'all. I'm excited for today's conversation. If you came in here to hear the AI news, technically we got a pre-recorded one debuting it live. So we are going to have that AI news in the newsletter. So make sure you go check that out. All right, cool. I'm excited to chat a little bit about computing and how it's changing and making AI affordable at scale. So please help me welcome to the show. We have Tom Curry, the CEO and co-founder of DistributeAI. Tom, thank you so much for joining the Everyday AI Show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. So before we get into this conversation, which, hey, for you, compute dorks, this is right up your alley. But for everyone else, Tom, tell us, what does DistributeAI do?
Yeah, so we're a distributed AI app layer. What that really means is we're basically going around and capturing spare compute. Could be your computer, could be anyone's computer around the world. And we're basically leveraging that to create more affordable options for consumers, businesses, things like that, mid-level businesses. And the goal is actually to create kind of a more open and accessible AI ecosystem. We want a lot more people to be able to contribute, be able to leverage kind of the resources that we aggregate. It's a pretty cool product.
Cool. So, give us an example. So, kind of even in my hypothetical I just talked about, let's say there's a medium-sized business, right? And maybe they haven't been big in the data game. Maybe they don't have their own servers and, they're trying to figure it out. So what is kind of that problem that you all solve?
Yeah. So it's a two-sided solution. It's a great example, right? You go to a business and they have, say, a bunch of computers sitting around in their offices. At night, they can connect into our network very quickly. We have a very quick one-click program to install. They can run that at night and provide compute to the network. And then when they wake up the next day and they want to leverage some of the AI models that we run, they can quickly tap into our APIs and basically get access to all of those models that we run on the network. So kind of two-sided, right? You can provide on one side and you can also use it on the other side.
Very cool. All right. So let's get caught up a little bit with, current day, because like I talked about, right, I don't think, compute and GPUs were at the top of, most people's mind, especially when, the GPT technology came out in 2020, let alone in, late 2022 when ChatGPT was released. So why is compute now just like one of the leading? I mean, we're talking about national security. We're talking about $100 billion infrastructure projects. Like, why is compute now this huge term when it comes to just the US economy at large?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, 5 years ago, if you go back, right, gaming was the biggest use case for GPUs. Nowadays, it's all AI, right? That's why there's huge demand for it. These models are getting bigger in some cases. They're also getting smaller. Chain of thought uses a ton of different tokens. So, although the models are smaller, it still uses a ton of resources. The reality is that silicon, as it stands today, one of our team members actually works on chips a little bit. We're basically reaching the peak capacity of what we can do with chips, right? We're definitely stretching thin the current technology that we have for chips. So although the models keep getting better, bigger, larger, more compute demand, the reality is that the technology is just not able to keep up. We're about 10 years out, give or take, from actually having basically a new technology for chips.
Sure. And as we talk about current demand today, right? You always see all these, jokes online, people are like, we'll work for compute, right? And the big tech companies, OpenAI, right?
Yeah.
Like whenever they roll out a new feature, a lot of times they're like, hey, our GPUs are melting. We're going to have to pause new user signups. Why is it that even the biggest tech companies can't keep up with this demand?
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy system where Anthropic has the same issue, right? Where Claude tokens are still kind of limited to this degree. We're running to the point where you're basically you're stretching the power grid thin. You're stretching every resource that we have in the world to run these different models. At the end of the day, OpenAI, I think they use primarily NVIDIA for their data centers. But once again, NVIDIA has demand all over the world for these chips. So they can't allocate all of their resources only to OpenAI. So OpenAI has certain threshold that they rent from and use. But the reality is, it's just there's too much demand. You're talking about millions and millions of requests. And the requests, for example, like image generation, these aren't like 1 second returns, right? You're talking about 10, 20 seconds to actually return these. And video models are even worse. You're talking about minutes potentially, even on H100 to H200. So the reality is, like I said, our compute, our power grid cannot possibly keep up with demand. And we don't have the latest gen chip for not enough.
Mm. So, one thing, and you kind of mentioned it, I think at the same time, we're seeing models become exponentially smaller and more powerful, right? Like, as an example, OpenAI's GPT-4o mini. Yet then you have these monster models like GPT-4.5,
Yeah.
right? Which is reportedly like 5 to 10 times larger than GPT-4, which was, I think, like a 2 trillion parameter model. So walk us through like like the whole concept of models both getting technically smaller and more efficient, yet models also at the same time getting bigger. And then how does that impact, right, the industry as a whole? Because it seems like it's hard to keep up with.
Yeah, on one end, it kind of reminds me of like cell phones back in the day, right? Where we would progressively get them smaller, and then eventually we had a new feature to get bigger and then kind of get smaller again. The reality is that a year ago, larger models, we were basically just throwing a million different data points into these models, which made the models much larger, and they were relatively good. But the reality is that no one wants to run a 7 billion, a 70 billion, 700 billion parameter model, right? So we've gotten them smaller. Now they're kind of working with the intricacies of how we're actually running these models. So chain of thought basically enables you to give a better prompt, right? It basically takes a human prompt, turns it into what the system can read better, and then gives you a better output. And it also might run through a bunch of tokens to give you a better output. So chain of thought's a really cool way to basically reduce the model size. But the reality is that although we're cutting the model size so we can put it on a smaller chip, the reality is you're still using a million tokens, which doesn't really actually help our compute issues. It's kind of backwards how it works. But it's funny.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? So yeah, even now we have these newer hybrid models in Claude 3.7 Sonnet,
Yeah.
in Gemini 2.5 Pro, and you use them and they seem relatively fast. And if you don't know any better, you might say, okay, this seems efficient. But then if you look at the chain of thought, or if you click like show thinking, you're like,
Yes.
my gosh, it just spit out 10,000 words to tell me, what's the capital of Illinois or something like that, right? So,
So
as models get smaller, this is something I'm always interested in. Might we see a future where, that more, hybrid models, or the
mhm.
reasoning models, will they eventually become less efficient, or is that always going to be something, kind of like on one side, models get smaller, but they're getting smarter. And so they're going to have to just think more regardless.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that we'll get to the point where they're highly efficient. I mean, realistically, the gains we've made with even DeepSeek is just incredible, right? Even their 7 billion parameter model, which is relatively small, you can run on most consumer grade chips, is extremely good. The prompting is great. It obviously has a pretty good knowledge base. And once you really combine that with the ability to surf the internet and actually get more answers and use more data, that's where I think we'll get to. I wouldn't call it AGI, but we're very close to that, where basically you're adding in real-time data with the ability to kind of reason a lot more. So I do think we'll get there. I think the progress that we made, although it seems like it's been forever since kind of the first models came out, the progress was insane and extremely quick. Yeah, I'm confident.
Yeah. And speaking of DeepSeek, I know it's been all the rage to talk about DeepSeek over the last the last couple of months, but I mean, I think you also have to call out Google, right? With their Gemma 3 model,
Yeah.
which I believe is a 27 billion parameter, greatly outperformed DeepSeek V3, which is I think 600 plus billion parameter, at least when it comes to ELO scores, and it's not even close, right? So what does this say about the future, right? I know I kind of named, two open models there, but, they're getting even the open, right? Everyone's like, oh, DeepSeek is, changing the industry. Well, I'm like, yo, look at Gemma 3
Yeah.
from Google. It is 5% the size and way more powerful when it comes to human preference, right? So what does this even mean for the future of edge computing, and how does edge computing impact compute need, or GPU demand?
Yeah, well, we started this business. The reality is that although we wanted to convince ourselves that open source models were good, we were basically blind. Right. Open source models were relatively bad. OpenAI was extremely dominant at that time. It was like you couldn't even believe that anyone would ever catch up to OpenAI. Nowadays, we're probably running at like a 1 to 2 month lag between parity of private source, and open source model, which is really interesting. And when you tie that in with the idea of kind of data privacy and things like that, I think there is a huge argument for basically edge compute taking over a lot of the smaller daily tasks, and then reserving some of the more private models and things like that, and the larger models for things that might be a little bit more deeper, like research and things like that. But a lot of things that you do on a daily basis that AI could actually improve, I think you can run purely on edge compute and basically have your house and your couple computers and things like that, maybe your laptop or iPad, basically turning into this little tiny data center that allows you to run whatever model you want to run at that time. We're just really far away. The reality is you can do that today, right? We could probably enable that in a week. The only problem is that getting it from teaching people to basically use that and set it up, right? It takes time for people to learn how to, install your own model and start running it, things like that. So it's more of like the UX of it more than anything.
Yeah. And that, I always think, right? I always think with these models becoming smaller, more capable, will most things be edge in the future, right? Like, I even saw the, NVIDIA GTX, right? Formerly called Digits. I did the math on that. I'm like, that would have cost 5 years ago, I think like $70,000. It wasn't even capable to do it anyways, right? Like,
Correct.
are we going to have the average, smartphone in 5 years? Will it be able to run state-of-the-art large language model? And if so, like, how does that change the whole cloud computing conversation?
It will be really interesting. I think you're 100% right. And I think 5 years might even be a stretch. I think what will come down to, like I said, is privacy. If people are really worried about their privacy, then I think that people will push for edge compute to be running, and you'll be able to run your own model that only uses access to your own data on your phone device, whatever it is, right? If people don't care about that as much, it might take a little bit longer just because people won't build that. But I really do think there are some teams that are building in that angle where essentially you're going to have your little database of information about yourself and your life, your wife and whatever else. And essentially you'll be able to run all of that stuff without ever touching any centralized model. For obvious reasons, privacy reasons, things like that. We already give so much data to big tech, right? I think we're good on giving any more and sharing any more intimate details about our lives. It'll be a good thing if we can do that.
Yeah. And, even as we start looking, at this race, which, if you looked at it 2 years ago, I don't know if anyone, even the staunchest, open source believers would believe that we're at the point that we are now. But, between whatever we're going to see from Meta in their next Llama model, we've already talked about DeepSeek and, Gemma as well. And, OpenAI also has recently said that they're going to be releasing an open model.
Supposedly.
Yeah. We'll see what happens.
We don't buy any of that. But
I remember the GPT two open fiasco, right?
Yeah.
But regardless, I mean, what happens when and if open models are more powerful than closed and proprietary models? So number one, what happens from, kind of a, GPU and compute perspective, but then how does that change, the business leader's mindset as well?
Yeah. So at that point, once things become commoditized, right, and the models are essentially all on the same level, give or take a little bit of change between a variation. The reality is that compute becomes the last denominator of basically being able to offer those models at the cheapest cost, right? So at that point, it basically comes down a race to the bottom in terms of who can get the cheapest compute and offer it to people with the best selection of models. And UX and UI all comes into that, right? Marketing, things like that. Assuming that does happen, the question then comes down to what happens to all these private source companies, right? Which my personal view on it is that there is probably a world where essentially OpenAI and Anthropic eventually burn so much money, which they lose money every day already, that they don't get to the point where they're looking to get to. And essentially they have to just either change business models or run out of money, right? I think that's probably a little bit of a contentious point. But the reality is that right now we're running models that are very close to as good as what they have. And it's like, so what point does the marginal gain, is it worth it, right? When H100s become a lot cheaper, we'll be able to run some of the biggest models very quickly and easy, and the access will just be so good that it might not matter. The problem is that, I personally I've always believed in private source. I do believe that there's great use cases for it. And the reality is like, whether you love Sam Altman or hate Sam Altman, he's pushed things forward a lot, right? He's been really productive for the entire environment. So you don't want them to go bankrupt, I don't think. They might just have to figure out a way to appeal to consumers or businesses in a different way, as opposed to just general models, which is what they do right now. I think in a great way, they talked about with Siri and things like that. They'll probably figure out ways to tie into the real.
Yeah. So speaking of, affordable AI, and you just brought up as well, companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, right? Their burning of cash is well documented. But I mean, does this at a certain point, if large language models become commoditized because of open source models, is it just more of the kind of the application layer that becomes the thing, these companies' real differentiator, right? Because aside from, OpenAI's $200 a month, pro subscription, it's like, okay, which they also said they're losing money on. Like, aside from that, how else are these big companies that so many people rely on going to continue to exist 5-10 years after their, $40 billion of funding, might run out if they're not
right at some point. We've been saying about this about Uber for how many years now, though, to be fair. These companies can exist a long time without being profitable. But I think the reality is that the one thing that these centralized type of providers offer, like OpenAI, is that they're able to work with a lot of data that would be very sensitive, primarily like health data and things like that. So I'm sure there's a lot of very good business use cases that they can provide to very large enterprise consumers, or not consumers, businesses. And I don't really know what those are outside of like health and things like that. That data that's very private, government contracts and things like that. Those models are super useful for that. But it will be tough. I mean, it would really, I feel like we're almost there already, to be honest with you. Like I said, I don't think we're that far away from the point where people are like, let me just cancel OpenAI and go use Long. Like, let me go cancel and use Jump. With all these different models that are out there. There's so many good ones at this point. But it might be more integrations. It might be more, like I said, UI, UX. It might be the fact that at the end of the day, we use iPhones every day and Androids, and maybe they just put a true monopoly on being able to use them, So we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, we've covered a lot in today's conversation, Tom, when this concept of distributed computing and how it's the race between open source AI and closed AI is really changing the compute landscape and just the AI landscape as a whole. But as we wrap up today's show, what's the one most important or the best piece of advice that you have for business leaders when it comes to making decisions, right, about how they are using AI at scale?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the best advice, the thing that we've learned the most from our personal business that I can provide, is that the landscape changes so fast. The last thing you can do is lock yourself into one specific provider or model. Don't allocate too many resources and sell the house on one specific setup, because the next week something comes out and totally breaks everything before it, right? So make sure you're open. Make sure you're flexible on what you're using and how you're using it, and be ready for someone to come out and completely break the mold and change the direction of everything. It's such a fast-paced environment. It's really hard to keep up. And I think we're just kind of still scratching the surface on where AI will actually integrate.
All right. Exciting conversation that I think a lot of people are going to find valuable. So, Tom, thank you so much for sharing your time and coming on the Everyday AI Show. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
All right. And hey, as a reminder, y'all, if you missed something in there, a lot of big terms we're tossing around and getting a little geeky on the GPU side, don't worry, we're going to be recapping it all in our free daily newsletter. So if you want to know more about what we just talked about, make sure you go to youreverydayai.com, sign up for the free daily newsletter. Thank you for tuning in. We hope to see you back tomorrow and every day for more Everyday AI. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for today's edition of Everyday AI. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating. It helps keep us going. For a little more AI magic, visit youreverydayai.com and sign up to our daily newsletter so you don't get left behind. Go break some barriers, and we'll see you next time.